Hi, Michael. How's it going?
It's going well. Just want to get my results so I can go.
I hear you. It seems like you've got a lot going on today.
Yeah, my friends are talking to me on Facebook.
So, Michael, the rapid test actually came back as preliminary positive.
What? What do you mean?
As we talked about before, these test results are preliminary positive. The rapid test is 99% accurate, so this is likely a positive test, meaning you are probably HIV positive. But we always need to do a second test with some blood to confirm your results. The results from the confirmatory test will come back in a week. This will really tell us if you are HIV positive or not.
So I should be on medications, right? What's going on? I was just coming in because my friends were coming in and getting tested and saying that this place was a good place to get tested. And now you're telling me I'm positive? How is this happening? How is this real?
I can understand that it can be really confusing, and you probably have a lot of thoughts going on. And you may find as the day goes on, more questions come up for you. I'll try to answer them all if I can. First, let's go over again what this means. Although the test is preliminary positive, it's not for sure. So that's why we have to do the confirmatory test. Those results will come back in a week. Am I making sense at all? I know this is a lot, especially if you weren't expecting it. Is it okay if I give you some more information?
Okay.
Well, if you do have HIV, I want you to know that it is now considered like a manageable chronic illness. I know those are big words to take in, but it's a lot like diabetes. If you take care of yourself and take medication for it, you can live a long life with HIV.
I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. I feel fine. I don't feel like anything is wrong with me. I thought if you're positive, it means you're sick and you're gonna die and you have all these issues. But I don't have any of those issues. I don't understand how this is happening to me. I don't get it.
Okay, well, I'll try and explain how you can get HIV. If you have anal, oral, or vaginal sex with someone, you usually come in contact with their body fluids. If they have HIV, those body fluids can transmit the virus into your bloodstream. You can also be exposed to HIV from someone's blood, usually from sharing needles with them.
This sucks. I only had sex once without a damn condom. Are you kidding me?
I can certainly understand why you're angry, Michael. Taking a risk just once and getting the virus seems unfair, doesn't it?
Sure does. I can't believe it.
It can feel kind of lonely, like you're the only person this has happened to, but you're not. Michael, I'd like to connect you with Jason, our peer advocate. He knows what it's like to get this diagnosis and what might come up for you, besides the medical stuff. And there are groups of people who meet to talk about it, so if you want to know more, he can tell you about it. How does that sound?
I don't know.
Michael, let's go ahead and get some blood drawn, and we can talk a bit as the process goes on. I'm here for as long as you need me to be, and we can talk for as long as you want to talk. I want you to remember that this is a preliminary positive result. We still need to get your confirmatory result.
This is too much for me. I don't understand. This is not what I was signing up for. I was ready for you to tell me that this was negative. Everyone was getting tested. So I got tested so we could all say we were negative. And now I can't. I just don't understand. You're telling me that the result was positive. Why do we need to do another test?
I understand you have a lot of anxiety about it, but I can't send you home today with a definitive answer whether you're positive or negative. There is a small chance, about 1 to 3%, that this result could be wrong. So we need to make sure that you have the infection by doing a blood test for confirmation. We need to do this with everyone who tests preliminary positive.
Okay. I get it now. But will they know I'm positive?
No, just that we're drawing some blood and sending it off to a lab.
Okay.
Michael, it takes up to a week to get the results from the blood test, and it's really important that you come back to get this result and that we know how to reach you, just in case something gets in the way of you coming back in.
Don't worry, I'll be back.
Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on right now, if you can?
I'm still just freaked out.
Michael, having HIV means you have the virus in your body. It does not mean it's the end of the world. There are some very good treatments for people to live a long time with HIV. I have patients who have lived with HIV for over 20 years that are still working, going to the gym, and dating. There are lots of great options for treatment that mean taking 1 to 3 pills a day and with much fewer side effects than before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but man, how am I going to pay for all that?
We have programs to help pay for your blood tests and medications. We'll also help you figure out your health care coverage. When you come back next week for your test results, I'll ask our staff to get you set up.
It's still scary. And it's going to be hard to wait.
I know, it can feel like forever. That's why it's important to figure out how you're going to deal with the wait. And with your sexual partners, you're going to want to avoid putting yourself or them at risk in any way. This means, for now, avoiding sex if you possibly can. And if you can't, it's very important that you use condoms now, or not share needles or works if you use IV drugs.
I don't do that, so I don't have to worry about that at least. And I will not be in the mood for sex for a long time.
Do you have anyone to confide in about this right away? Anyone you could talk to?
I have to think about it. Maybe my sister? But I'm not sure she'd understand.
Well, Jason's really easy to get in touch with, and he can tell you more about groups that get together and other support systems. Hi, Michael. How's it going?
It's going well. Just want to get my results so I can go.
I hear you. Seems like you've got a lot going on today.
Yeah, my friends are talking to me on Facebook.
So it's common for teenagers to come in and text and just want the results. Don't take it personally. The last thing you want to do is to take it personally because youth are really good at picking up on whether or not there's a power dynamic. For example, if a clinician comes in and says, hey, I don't want you texting, they're probably going to shut off and might not return. And that's risky when you're dealing with a preliminary positive result.
Call it out and say, hey, I noticed that you're texting a lot, and maybe that's a really engaging conversation that you're having, but is it possible for that conversation to be placed on hold until we finish our conversation?
So, Michael, the rapid test actually came back as preliminary positive.
What? What do you mean?
As we talked about before, these test results are preliminary positive. The rapid test is 99% accurate, so this is likely a positive test, meaning you are probably HIV positive.
I felt that the provider was observant, she was calm, non-judgmental, and neutral in delivering the preliminary positive result to the patient.
If I have a preliminary result, I'll sometimes even talk to a colleague before going into that result disclosure. And the reason why is because it helps you get out your own nerves. You know, it helps you process that information. So you go in already knowing what some of your own personal triggers might be for that session. And then when you go into that session, you're able to quiet your own internal voice and your own internal dialogues and actually listen to where your client's at and takes your client's lead.
We always need to do a second test with some blood to confirm your results. The results from the confirmatory test will come back in a week. This will really tell us if you are HIV positive or not.
There's another way that she could also explain it, which is saying, this means that you are likely infected with the HIV virus. This alludes to the fact that he has a viral infection as opposed to a new identity as being HIV positive.
And now you're telling me I'm positive? How is this happening? How is this real, you know?
I can understand that it can be really confusing, and you probably have a lot of thoughts going on.
When the provider said that she could understand that this could be confusing, when she also said that this could be a lot or this can be a lot, she validated his feelings of overwhelm, of confusion, of anger. And these are common feelings that come up when somebody receives an unexpected HIV diagnosis.
We're holding some very personal space with our clients, and we're helping them through some unique transitions that they may never share with anyone else other than us. And we want to create a safe space for that client. So we don't want to give them a facial response like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do, and I'm so sorry that this is happening to you." But rather like saying like, "Yes, I understand that this can be an overwhelming situation."
Let's go over again what this means. Although the test is preliminary positive, it's not for sure. So that's why we have to do the confirmatory test. Those results will come back in a week. Am I making sense at all?
It's not uncommon for youth to be upset when you give a preliminary positive result. You're going to want to slow down the session. This particular client expressed this belief, right? So in slowing down, you want to break it down for them. Also being sure not to give too much information at once because you might lose them. You have to remember that if in fact they are emotionally overwhelmed, they're not going to be listening to everything you say.
It's really important that we give the patient some a moment to actually digest the information, even if they don't have an immediate response for us. Silence is going to be one of our best tools in these situations because we get to gauge where a patient's at. We get to take their lead.
I know this is a lot, especially if you weren't expecting it. Is it okay if I give you some more information?
When we're eliciting the client, if we can continue forward, and is it okay for me to continue forward, we're actually giving them power. We're giving them power to say no. We're giving them power to process the information. We're giving them the power to ask more questions, and actually just checking in with the client and making sure that we're staying connected to where our client's at.
I don't understand how this is happening to me. I don't get it.
Okay, well, I'll try and explain how you can get HIV.
The patient started to start spinning. The emotions start spinning, the thoughts start spinning. And he actually even expressed, like, I really wasn't expecting to get a positive diagnosis, which is something in which you'll see often in clinical settings. Patients just come in for routine screenings. They'll come in for whatever incentive you're giving. It's just be something that they're doing in their day and not really processing the possibility of becoming positive.
I think she did a good job at dealing with the patient being shocked. In this case, she met him where he was at and started to explain what exactly it means to be HIV positive, or in this case, preliminary positive. That's usually the best approach. The denial or the shock might come from just being overwhelmed, and so sometimes you might need to repeat things, and that's okay.
We need to make sure that you have the infection by doing a blood test for confirmation. We need to do this with everyone who tests preliminary positive.
The aspect of disclosing a preliminary positive is that we are in an ambiguous state, right? We don't have a confirmatory result. We don't know for sure that this person is actually HIV positive. However, we are giving them information that says, hey, consider the fact that you are most likely positive. And what that most likely positive usually triggers for a lot of people is I'm positive. And going through the emotional response of reforming a new identity, like thinking about who am I going to disclose to, who are my pillars of support, what does this mean in my life, where do I go from here, and what if I have a date then today, like do I need to cancel that date?
Michael, it takes up to a week to get the results from the blood test, and it's really important that you come back to get this result and that we know how to reach you, just in case something gets in the way of you coming back in. It can feel kind of lonely, like you're the only person this has happened to, but you're not. Michael, I'd like to connect you with Jason, our peer advocate.
She wanted to make sure that she linked the client into services immediately. And the reason why that is because we noticed like the longer that a patient has to stay out of care, usually it's harder for a patient to come back into care. So it's really important to get that second follow-up visit scheduled and agreed upon sooner rather than later. And she also offered peer advocacy support in the preliminary positive stage. And that may vary depending on client to client. Some clients may actually have a very strong reaction to getting a preliminary positive, and you may feel like they need additional counseling.
It was great that the provider asked the patient about his social support. Not all organizations have peer advocates, so it's important also to know what other forms of social support he has with friends and family.
I'm still just freaked out.
When a client starts to break down and cry, like a lot of our human response is to go over and actually coddle them or hold them, or gently let them know in some physical manner that everything's going to be okay. And I would caution around that. The reason why I would caution around that is because, one, you don't know the culture of that individual, the cultural background. Secondly, also, you may be working in institutions where touching is prohibited. So one of the things that you can do is just sit there and hold that space with that person. As hard as and uncomfortable you may feel, that client just being able to let that emotion out with you actually is doing a great deal.
I have patients who have lived with HIV for over 20 years that are still working, going to the gym, and dating. There are lots of great options for treatment that mean taking 1 to 3 pills a day and with much fewer side effects than before. Does that make sense?
Although I understand why the clinician said that she knows people who have lived over 20 years, I would stay away from using numbers for a few reasons. For starters, we don't know what that particular patient's case is. It could very well be that they have advanced AIDS disease or other complications as a result of being undiagnosed for a certain number of time. We don't want to give them false hope, and we don't want to give them false confidence.
I know, it can feel like forever. That's why it's important to figure out how you're going to deal with the weight. And with your sexual partners, you're going to want to avoid putting yourself or them at risk in any way. This means, for now, avoiding sex if you possibly can. And if you can't, it's very important that you use condoms now, or not share needles or works if you use IV drugs.
I like that she placed an emphasis on taking care of his health. You want to make it about them. The last thing you want to do is to make a patient feel or a client feel like it's them against the world, right? If you place an emphasis on like, this is about your care, this is about keeping you safe, it'll make them feel much more comfortable.
I think it's really important to spend more time talking to him about his specific risks and how specifically he can protect himself and other people. If he was recently infected, he is at the most highly infectious time in his life. So it is of critical importance that he understands that and protects other people from getting infected. Sometimes with a new HIV diagnosis, there's a risk for intimate partner violence. And that may be because the partner may think that they infected the patient, or they may also think that the patient infected them. If it's unexpected or comes in the context of a culture that has a lot of stigma against HIV, a patient could feel really a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of kind of self-hate with that. And as a result of that, there may be a risk of self-directed violence, so suicide, or for some people, they may cut or try to hurt themselves. So if the provider finds out that the patient is at risk of getting hurt or hurting himself, then it's important that she accesses the resources that are available in her community about that. For example, she may want to refer him to a mental health counselor who can help monitor him more carefully. Or if he's at threat of violence, then potentially a safe house where he can stay temporarily while things get sorted out.
Do you have anyone to confide in about this right away? Anyone you could talk to?
At least the client already is starting to think about people that he can build a strong support network with outside of the clinician themselves. And that helps to break down isolation. We really want to try to avoid clients going into a deep set isolation, because we find that if they go into isolation, it's possible for them to go into a depression as well.
So what I loved about this clinician is that she was calm, she had a neutral stance, and she wasn't anxious at all. That's important because a client will pick up on the way you're feeling. If you're frustrated, anxious, unsure, they're going to pick up on it. And it's probably going to make them lose confidence in your ability to give accurate information. In this case, the clinician had all the right things to say. The only thing I would have pulled back a little bit on is on how much information she gave. She could have pulled back a little bit, given the person some time to digest, and then checked in with him periodically. But aside from that, she was perfect.
One of the things that might be helpful is just to be ready to navigate all kinds of emotions. In this video, you saw a little bit of anger, you saw a little bit of sadness, you saw a little bit of frustration, and these things can really get big. You know, some people can have some serious reactions where they're just going to break down and cry. Some people might actually just be extremely angry. And it's one of the things in which I would like to offer is to not own any of those emotions. It's not directed towards you. It's just that these people are venting these feelings out. She could have asked the client, so what do you understand about our plan of action? And let the client repeat the plan of action back towards the provider. And usually I would do that towards the end, just so that you have a buy-in and a complete understanding of what's going on. And it gives you that opportunity to fill in any gaps that the client may have.
So Michael, now that we've gone over what your next steps are, I'm hoping you have a minute to discuss a new program we're starting to try to encourage more people to get tested for HIV.
Yeah, I do.
Great. Well, we're doing something called peer recruitment. We're asking people who've already gotten tested, who might know people who are at risk for HIV, to encourage their friends to come in and get tested. After some of their friends get tested, they ask some of their friends to get tested, and so on. Make sense?
Yeah.
So what happens is, before you leave today, we'll give you 3 tickets and some tips on how to talk to people who you think might be at risk for HIV about getting tested here. When a person you talk to agrees to come in for an HIV test, give them a ticket and have them bring it with them when they come in. In return, we'll pay you $10 for every person who comes in, up to 3 people. We'll pay them $10 too, so you can tell them that.
How could I tell them without them knowing that I have it?
You don't have to tell anyone that you're HIV positive if you don't want to. We're asking people who are HIV positive and people who are HIV negative to participate. Some of your friends who've been coming here to get tested are probably being asked to join the program too. And if you want, you can tell people that you saw the sign up in the waiting room and asked about it. And if you don't feel comfortable asking 3 people, you can ask 2 or even just 1.
I guess that sounds okay.
Okay, so if you think you're going to do this, I can give you this page of tips on how to approach people about testing and some other information. And of course, I'm here if you need help.
I think I can give this a try. It seems pretty easy. And you get paid from doing it.
If it is relevant for a particular patient, like Michael, I think it's good to mention if he feels well taken care of. This is his chance to help his friends, to know their status, and to take care of themselves. It is an extra and very important incentive for him in recruiting other people.
So social network testing is a really great innovative strategy of trying to identify individuals who aren't being tested for HIV. And we've been doing testing for quite a while, but we're now trying to get to the people who aren't necessarily coming in to do testing. And some people are going to have mixed emotions around giving out a coupon to elicit people to come in and bring in their social and sexual networks. However, this is another strategy in which clients can opt out of. And we always want to give them the right to opt out. But it's also good to also let them know that they can partake in something in which can help identify other positives who may go unnoticed and undetected.
If you're asking them, hey, do you want to bring in your friends to get tested? It might make them feel like you're accusing them of something. So I would hold off. I check in with them, attend to their care, and then when you feel like the time is right, like they've relaxed a bit, I would then introduce the idea.
It's less stigmatizing than asking a patient to bring in partners for testing. You could basically just encourage patients who have a good experience to have their friends, help their friends to come in, get tested, know their status, and get into care. As you saw in the last scene, the provider invited Michael to participate in something called social network testing, which is a form of recruiting others for HIV testing. I'd like to go into some of the background behind why we do social network testing and why it's one of the most effective forms of testing for HIV. In comparing different HIV testing strategies, we want a standardized way to look at them. And so we look at what we call numbers needed to test. That means how many people do we need to test for HIV before we find somebody who's newly diagnosed positive? When we analyzed a regional public emergency department HIV testing program, we found that we had to test over 298 people to find one single new diagnosis of HIV. In comparison, when we looked at an MSM venue, in other words, a gay, bisexual, or men who have sex with men venue, a bathhouse, in the same region, we found that we only had to test 30 people before we found a single new diagnosis. Now, we talk about social network testing. In the same region, we did an adult social network testing program. That is, in a clinic that serves people with HIV, we asked people who have the diagnosis of HIV to recruit their friends or partners or anybody in their social network to come and get tested. And we found that it only took 17 tests to find a new diagnosis of HIV. So you can see this is a much higher yield, even in an adult population. In the youth population in the same region, we did the same thing where we asked youth with HIV to go out and recruit their friends in their social network to come and get tested. They only needed to test 7 young people to find one new diagnosis of HIV. What this tells us is that people in the same social network also face very similar risks. And so this is an extremely efficient and effective way of finding people who are infected with HIV and hopefully, ultimately, getting them into care. I'd like now to explain how social network testing works. You start out with somebody who is at high risk for HIV, who's been tested, or somebody who has HIV. You give them 3 coupons with incentives to get other people in their social network tested. So the person who's the recruiter then gets $10 for each of their people in their social network who gets tested, and each person who comes in to get tested gets $10 themselves, just for getting tested. Those 3 people in the second round then get 3 coupons to recruit other people in their social network, and on and on. After just about 4 rounds of social network testing, you'll get up to 120 people tested for HIV. And because you're in these high-risk social network pools, we estimate, at least in the region here where we've done social network testing, that you would get 7 new diagnoses of HIV just from testing these 4 rounds of social network testing. The numbers needed to test in order to find new HIV diagnoses will vary from region to region. It'll depend on that region's testing coverage. Social network testing may even be more effective in regions where there's not a lot of testing coverage because it's hard to actually penetrate into these social networks. Like, it's really hard to recruit people who are within these high-risk social networks because there's not a whole lot of testing accessible to everybody. This is a way for the community to get really involved with HIV testing and to help friends and people in their social network to come in and get tested and take care of themselves. We're not having professionals or outreach workers go out and find people. We're actually having peers talk to friends and family about getting tested, which is, I think, a lot more effective.
Ultimately, you're working with another human being. You want to remember that this is someone who lives, breathes, eats just like you do. You want to make that connection. You never want to make them feel like there's something other than human. So just remember, if you were sitting in that other seat, what would you want to hear? What would feel good for you? And just keep that in the back of your mind throughout the whole entire session.
I know it can be difficult to deliver an HIV diagnosis, especially to somebody who's not expecting that result. You don't have to have all the answers. As you could see in this last scene, as long as you're calm, reassuring, and present for the patient, you can engage them into care and really save their life.